Hello and welcome to Gloomy Realm. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently guide you into forgotten places where the silence is deep and the shadows never truly fade, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, make yourself comfortable. Let your body become completely still and allow the sounds of the outside world to dissolve into silence. Tonight, the air grows colder, the mist begins to gather, and the forgotten corners of the night awaken once more. So close your eyes, listen carefully, leave the ordinary behind, and lose yourself within the gloomy realm. Let's begin. Story 1. I grew up in a small town in the far south of Italy, hidden among dry mountains and steep hills. From a distance, the town looked beautiful. Rows of pale stone houses covered the hillside, red roofs shining beneath the sun, with an old church tower standing above everything else. Tourists sometimes passed through during the summer and took photographs of the narrow streets, the balconies covered with flowers, and the elderly men sitting outside cafes. But living there was different. The town was a maze of tight alleys, stone stairways, and houses that all looked almost exactly the same. During the hottest months, the air became thick and wet. Heat stayed trapped between the buildings, and even at night, the walls seemed to breathe warmth back into the streets. The smell of dust, cooking oil, and damp stone followed you everywhere. Everyone knew everyone else. Privacy barely existed. If you missed church one Sunday, people noticed. If you argued with your parents, your neighbors somehow heard about it before dinner. Every family had its own stories, its own secrets, and its own rules, but nobody spoke openly about them. My family was deeply religious. We prayed before every meal, even if the food was getting cold. We went to church every Sunday morning, no matter how tired or sick we were. My mother kept small statues of saints in almost every room. A wooden cross hung above the front door, and another one was fixed over the bed my younger brother and I shared for most of our childhood. My father rarely spoke about his feelings, but he spoke about God often. Whenever something good happened, it was God's reward. Whenever something bad happened, it was either a test or a punishment. There was always a religious explanation. By the time I was 13, I had started questioning most of it. I did not hate religion, and I did not want to hurt my parents. I simply found scientific explanations easier to believe. I loved reading about medicine, biology, astronomy, and the human brain. The more I learned, the harder it became to accept every strange event as the work of angels or demons. My parents did not know how deeply my doubts had grown. I still attended church. I still lowered my head during prayers. I still said amen at the dinner table. It was easier than arguing with them. The only person who truly understood me was my younger brother, Leonardo. Everyone called him Leo. He was 10 years old, 3 years younger than me, and we were closer than most brothers I knew. We played football together in the narrow street behind our house. We collected insects in glass jars and released them after trying to identify them in old science books. At night, we sometimes climbed onto the flat section of our roof and looked at the stars through a cheap telescope our uncle had given us. Leo was curious about everything. He asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. Why did people pray if God already knew what they wanted? Why did the stars look small if they were larger than Earth? Why could the brain remember dreams that had never really happened? I never laughed at his questions. I tried to answer them. For a long time, Leo was energetic, intelligent, and friendly. He always had dirt on his knees and some new idea in his head. He had several friends from school who came to our house almost every afternoon. Then he began to change. At first, the changes were small. He stopped asking his friends to visit. When they knocked on the door, he told my mother he was tired or had homework. He no longer wanted to play football with me. Instead, he sat alone in our bedroom, drawing in a notebook or staring at the empty corner near the wardrobe. His grades began to fall. Teachers said he stopped paying attention in class. Sometimes he did not answer when someone called his name. Other times he spoke without making sense, combining words in strange ways or answering questions nobody had asked. My parents became worried, but they did not know what to do. My mother thought he was being bullied. My father believed he was becoming lazy. They argued about whether to punish him, speak to his teacher, or take him to a doctor. I tried talking to Leo myself. He always said he was fine, but he did not look fine. He became pale, and dark circles appeared under his eyes. He often woke during the night and sat upright in bed, staring at the door. When I asked what was wrong, he would place one finger against his lips and tell me to stay quiet. "He doesn't like it when we talk about him," Leo once whispered. I asked who he meant. Leo lay back down and pulled the blanket over his face. The next morning, he claimed not to remember the conversation. A few weeks later, I came home from school and found him sitting at the kitchen table with several sheets of paper spread in front of him. He was drawing with a black pencil. Most of the pictures were dark circles, twisted lines, and faces with empty eyes. One drawing showed our house from above, but the roof had been removed. Inside each room stood a tall, black shape. I asked him what it meant. He quickly covered the picture with another sheet of paper. "It's nothing," he said. His voice sounded nervous. I wanted to tell my parents, but I knew they would react badly. My father would shout. My mother would bring holy water into the room. I thought Leo needed someone who could listen without frightening him. So I waited. The moment that changed everything happened on a quiet afternoon. I was lying on my bed reading a book about the human nervous system. The windows were open, but the room was still unbearably warm. I could hear insects outside and the distant bells from the church. Leo entered without knocking. He was holding his drawing notebook against his chest. He closed the door behind him and stood there for several seconds. "What's wrong?" I asked. He did not answer. He walked over and sat beside me on the bed. His hands were trembling. Then he opened the notebook and showed me a picture. It was more detailed than his other drawings. A tall, dark figure stood in the center of the page. It had a human-shaped body, but 3 long necks rose from its shoulders. Each neck ended in a different head. The first head had large round eyes and a mouth filled with thin teeth. The second had no eyes at all, only deep black holes. The third head looked almost human, except its mouth stretched too far across its face. Blood poured from all 3 mouths. The figure's arms were unnaturally long. Its fingers touched the ground. Behind it, Leo had drawn small people lying in pools of red. One of them looked like our mother. Another looked like our father. The smallest figure looked like me. I stared at the drawing, trying to remain calm. "Who is this?" I asked. Leo looked over my shoulder toward a wooden chair near the window. "His name is Mr. Z." I almost smiled because the name sounded childish, but Leo's expression stopped me. His eyes were wide with real fear. "He comes to visit me," Leo continued. "He comes almost every day now." I glanced toward the chair. It was empty. "What do you mean he visits you?" "He sits there." Leo pointed directly at the chair. "He's sitting there now." A cold feeling moved across my skin, even though the room was hot. I looked again. There was nothing on the chair, only a shirt I had left hanging over the back. "Leo, there's nobody there." "Yes, there is." His voice became softer. "He's looking at us." I put the book aside. "Can you describe him?" Leo looked down at the drawing. "He looks like this, but sometimes the heads change. Sometimes one of them looks like Grandma. Sometimes it looks like you." I tried to tell myself that he was having a mental health problem. Hallucinations could feel completely real to the person experiencing them. I had read about them. Stress, illness, lack of sleep, and several medical conditions could cause a child to see or hear things. I asked what Mr. Z wanted. Leo's lower lip began to shake. "I don't know." "Has he ever touched you?" "Not with his hands." I did not understand what that meant. "What does he say?" Leo looked toward the chair again. His entire body became tense. "He says he wants to kill Mom and Dad." He paused. "And you." His voice broke on the last word. I moved closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Z isn't real," I said. "I know you can see him, but he can't hurt us." Leo suddenly grabbed my wrist. His fingers were cold. "You shouldn't say that." "Why?" "He doesn't like being called unreal." I had been so focused on Leo that I had not noticed the bedroom door opening. My parents were standing in the doorway. My mother had heard enough of the conversation to understand what Leo was saying. Her face had gone white. One hand covered her mouth. My father stood behind her, staring from Leo to the empty chair. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother screamed, "The devil has possessed you!" Leo began to cry. My mother rushed forward, grabbed his face, and started praying loudly. She demanded that he repeat the name of Jesus. Leo tried to pull away, but she held him tightly. My father removed the wooden cross from above our bed and pressed it against Leo's forehead. I shouted at them to stop. I said he needed a doctor. My father told me not to interfere. That evening, the whole family gathered in the living room. My parents called several relatives and told them what had happened. Within an hour, our house was full of whispering adults. Nobody suggested taking Leo to a hospital. Nobody spoke about a psychologist. They all agreed that an evil spirit had entered him. My grandmother's sister said she knew a woman who could help. She called the woman a healer, but others described her as a sorceress. According to my aunt, she knew ancient prayers and rituals that had been passed down through generations. I argued with them. I said Leo was ill and needed proper medical care. I explained that seeing things could be a symptom of several conditions. My father became furious. "You think books know more than God?" he asked. I told him that Leo was frightened and that treating him like a monster would only make things worse. My mother slapped me. It was the first time she had ever struck me. She immediately began crying and asked God to forgive me for my lack of faith. The healer was called that night. She agreed to come the following evening. For the rest of the day, Leo was kept inside our bedroom. My parents removed anything sharp and locked the windows. They placed a cross on the door and burned incense in the hallway. I sat with him for as long as they allowed me. Leo was quiet. He asked whether I believed him. I told him that I believed he was seeing something, even if I did not understand what it was. "That isn't the same," he said. I knew he was right. Before I left the room, he pulled me close. "If something happens to me, don't let them think they won." "Who?" He looked toward the chair. "Any of them." The healer arrived after sunset. She was an old woman dressed completely in black. Her gray hair was covered by a scarf, and several metal crosses hung around her neck. She carried a leather bag filled with candles, jars of herbs, bottles of dark liquid, and objects I could not identify. The moment she entered our house, she stopped. Her eyes moved slowly toward the stairs. "It knows I'm here," she said. My mother began crying again. The healer went upstairs and inspected our bedroom. She walked around Leo, whispered prayers, and touched his forehead with 2 fingers. Then she looked at my father. "The boy has been marked by Señor Z." She said the name as though it belonged to something famous. My father asked what Señor Z was. The healer explained that he was a powerful infernal spirit. She claimed he sometimes appeared to children because their minds were easier to enter. Once inside, he fed on fear and slowly destroyed the family around them. I did not believe her. At least, I tried not to. But when she mentioned 3 faces, my stomach tightened. Nobody had shown her Leo's drawing. The ritual began close to midnight. I was ordered to remain downstairs while my parents, several relatives, and the healer stayed in the bedroom with Leo. They locked the door. At first I heard prayers. The healer spoke in Italian, then in Latin, and finally in a language I did not recognize. My parents repeated certain words after her. Leo cried and begged them to stop. I paced the kitchen, unable to sit still. The ritual grew louder. Furniture scraped across the floor. Glass shattered. My mother screamed. Then Leo began speaking in a voice that did not sound like his own. It was low and rough, like the voice of an adult man. Another voice answered from the room, then another. For a moment, it sounded as though several people were speaking through Leo at the same time. I wanted to run upstairs, but 2 of my uncles blocked the staircase. They told me the healer had warned them not to interrupt the ritual. I shouted that they were hurting him. They held me back. The sounds continued for almost an hour. Leo screamed my name several times. Each time, I tried to break free. Then, all the noise stopped. The silence was worse. Nobody prayed. Nobody moved. For several minutes, the house remained completely still. Then I heard crying from upstairs. I pushed past my uncles and ran to the bedroom. The door was open. The smell inside made me stop. Burned herbs, sweat, and something sharp like hot metal filled the room. Candles had been placed in a circle around the bed. Strange symbols were drawn across the floor in white powder. The chair near the window had been broken into pieces. My mother knelt beside the bed, crying into her hands. My father stood against the wall with blood on his shirt. The healer was gathering her things. Leo lay in the center of the bed. His eyes were closed. His skin was almost gray. I rushed to him and touched his face. He was cold. I shook him and called his name. He did not move. The healer said the demon had been removed. I asked why Leo was not breathing. Nobody answered. I pressed my ear against his chest. There was no heartbeat. My little brother was dead. I screamed at the healer. I accused her of killing him. My father pulled me away while I tried to reach her. The old woman remained calm. She said some bodies were too weak to survive purification. She told us that Leo's soul was safe now and that we should be thankful. Thankful. My 10-year-old brother was lying dead on the bed, and she told us to be thankful. My mother later claimed that just before I entered the room, black smoke had risen from Leo's mouth. It moved toward the ceiling, crossed the room, and escaped through the open window. She believed the smoke was Senior Z leaving his body. To her, that meant the ritual had worked. To me, it meant my family had allowed a frightened child to die because they trusted superstition more than medicine. The funeral took place several days later. Relatives I had not seen in years filled the church. People hugged me and said Leo was with God. The priest spoke about innocence, heaven, and the mystery of divine plans. I did not hear most of it. I stared at the small coffin and remembered Leo sitting beside me on the roof, asking questions about the stars. I remembered him drawing pictures at the kitchen table. I remembered his cold fingers around my wrist. You shouldn't say that. He doesn't like being called unreal. After the funeral, I became severely depressed. Every day after school, I locked myself in my room. I stopped playing sports. I stopped reading. I barely spoke to my parents. My mother tried to comfort me with prayer. My father told me grief was another test from God. Neither of them ever admitted that the ritual might have killed Leo. They believed the demon was responsible. I blamed all of them. I also blamed myself. I should have done more. I should have called the police or an ambulance. I should have taken Leo and run from the house. For years I woke from dreams in which he stood beside the empty chair. Sometimes he asked why I had not saved him. Sometimes all three heads of Mr. Z rose behind him. I did not truly begin recovering until 4 years later, when I left my hometown and moved to Milan. The city felt like another world. It was crowded, fast, and anonymous. Nobody knew my family. Nobody noticed whether I attended church. For the first time, I could build a life that did not belong to my parents or the traditions of our town. I studied psychiatry. Part of me chose that career because of Leo. I wanted to understand what had happened to him. I wanted to learn why the mind could create voices, faces, and monsters that seemed completely real. I studied childhood psychosis, trauma, hallucinations, and dissociative disorders. With every new lesson, I became more certain that my brother had needed medical treatment. Not candles, not prayers, not a healer dressed in black. Eventually, I found work at a psychiatric clinic and began building a new life. I met a woman who later became my girlfriend. For the first time since Leo's death, I felt that I might be able to leave the past behind. Then one evening, a new patient was brought into the clinic. He was 10 years old. He had stopped speaking to his friends. His grades had fallen. He spent hours staring at an empty chair in his bedroom. His mother handed me a drawing he had made. It showed a dark figure with 3 heads. Blood poured from each mouth. At the bottom of the page, written in a child's uneven handwriting, were 2 words: Mr. Z. That was when I understood that whatever had happened to Leonardo was not finished. And before long, I would discover something far more terrifying than possession. Mr. Z had never entered my brother. He had been trying to warn him. Story 2. People ask me all the time if I get bored. Same streets every morning, same porches, same coolers full of milk, eggs, orange juice, butter, yogurt, and whatever else people tap into the app before they go to bed. I always tell them no. A good route is like a good marriage. At first you notice the work. You notice the early mornings, the heavy crates, the cold air, and the way your back starts hurting before sunrise. But after enough years, the work becomes part of you. You stop counting the stops and start noticing smaller things. You notice when Mrs. Adler's hydrangeas begin to bloom. You notice when the Pruitt boy leaves his bike in the driveway again, even though his father has warned him 100 times that someone will run over it. You notice the way the morning light comes up over Cedar Hollow at 5:45, turning the whole street gray while every house is still asleep. Nobody is awake except me. Just me, the birds, and the low humming sound of the cooler motor in the back of my van. I love my route. I need you to understand that before I tell you anything else. I know the people on it, not personally most of the time. I do not sit at their tables or attend their birthdays. I do not know all their middle names or what they watch on television at night. But you would be surprised how much you can learn about a family from what they leave on a porch. I know the Garzas are trying to have a baby because their recycling changed. It used to be mostly wine bottles and beer cans. Then one week, those disappeared. A little later, I started seeing empty boxes from prenatal vitamins and fertility tests. I began leaving their eggs closer to the door so the morning sun would not reach them. They never asked me to. You just do these things for your people. I know Mr. Petrie's wife died because their order changed after the funeral. For years, they bought a full gallon of 2% milk every Tuesday and Friday. Then the order dropped to a half gallon of skim and stayed that way. 1 cup of tea in the morning, a small bowl of cereal at night. That is what grief looked like on his porch. I started placing his milk in the shade behind the flower pot because he does not always bring it inside right away. Some mornings, he sits in the kitchen and forgets the world is still moving. He has never thanked me. He does not know I do it. That is fine. You do not take care of people because you want credit. The app tells me where to go. 40 stops on a light day. 50 or more when holidays are close. The screen puts them in a nice, clean line, so I never need to cross my own path. After 11 years, I barely look at it. My hands know the route. They turn the wheel before my eyes catch up. My foot leaves the gas at the right driveway. My arm reaches for the correct cooler before I have finished reading the address. That is what time does. It turns memory into instinct. But there are a few stops that are not in the app. This is the part people have trouble understanding. There are houses on my route that never placed an order. Their names do not appear on my screen. The company does not bill them. My manager does not know I visit them. I stop anyway. I do not decide to stop. I simply know that I must, the same way you know which direction is up when you wake in the dark, the same way you know your own name. The first time it happened was 11 years ago, on my first morning alone. I was new then, nervous, still checking the app every 30 seconds to make sure I had not missed a turn. The sun had not risen yet, and a thin fog covered the street. I was driving along Sycamore when my hands turned the wheel. I had not planned to stop. There was no address on the screen. But the van rolled to the side of the road and stopped in front of a blue house with white trim. I sat there with the engine running. The house was dark. A porch swing moved slightly, though there was no wind. I knew I had to leave something on the back step. I also knew exactly what it was. A small glass jar sat in the passenger side footwell. I had never seen it before. I do not know how it got into the van. I picked it up and walked around the house. The back gate was unlocked. The grass was wet beneath my shoes. I placed the jar beside the kitchen door, took a photograph, returned to the van, and drove away. I did not question it, not then. People imagine they would panic if something impossible happened to them. They think they would scream, call the police, or refuse to continue. Most of the time, you do not. Most of the time, the impossible arrives quietly and fits itself into your routine. 3 days later, an ambulance was parked outside the blue house. Then, there was a long silence. The curtains stayed closed. The bins were not taken out. A week later, a sign appeared in the yard. For sale. A new family eventually moved in. The Coopers. Nice people. They order 2% milk and a dozen brown eggs every Thursday. Mrs. Cooper sometimes leaves a note asking me to put the bag behind the large planter if rain is expected. They have no idea what happened in their kitchen before they bought the place. They have no idea I once walked around their house before sunrise and placed a jar beside the back door. I am not going to tell you what was inside that jar. Some details are better left alone. Nobody watches the delivery man. That is one of the first things I learned. You become invisible when you wear a uniform and carry a clipboard. People will open locked gates for you. They will tell you which window does not close properly. They will laugh while saying the side door is usually unlocked because they keep forgetting to fix it. They will hand you alarm codes if you say you need to put frozen food inside. People tell strangers in uniforms things they would never tell a priest. They trust the rote. That is the important part. They do not trust me as a person because most of them do not really know me. They trust the van, the uniform, and the same morning schedule. The route is familiar. Familiar means safe. The Hadley house took 4 minutes last autumn. Mr. Hadley had shown me the window months earlier. It was a hot day, and he had been working in the yard while I carried groceries to the porch. He pointed up at the second floor and laughed. "That window still doesn't latch," he said. "My wife keeps telling me to fix it." I laughed with him. People like when you laugh. They think it means you are not paying attention. I remembered. That is another part of the job. I remember everything. Last autumn, I woke before my alarm and knew the Hadley house was not in the app that morning, but it was on the other route, the route beneath the route. I arrived at 5:23. The sky was still black. It took 3 minutes to reach the upstairs window. The garden shed had a ladder leaning against the side, exactly where I knew it would be. The window opened without making much noise. The bedroom was warm. Mr. Hadley slept on his back. His wife was visiting her sister for the week. I knew that because she had mentioned it while adjusting their order. He never woke. Most of them do not. You learn the weight of a person who is completely asleep. You learn the difference between someone resting and someone too far gone to fight. You learn how breathing changes. At first, it is deep. Then it becomes weak. Then it turns into a thin thread. Then there is nothing. The room becomes so quiet that you can hear the cooler motor humming through the floorboards and the open window. I left the bedroom exactly as I had found it. I put the ladder back beside the shed. Before leaving, I placed the milk inside the fridge so it would not spoil. Then I took my photograph. A clean picture of the front porch, gray sky, white bottle, timestamp in the corner, proof of delivery. After that, I drove to the Garzas and left an extra carton of eggs. They had received bad news that week. You root for some people. The company makes me photograph every normal delivery. The image is uploaded to the app so customers can see where I place their order. At the houses that are not in the app, I take photographs too. I do not upload them. I keep them on another phone. It sits in the bottom drawer of my desk at home, wrapped in an old towel. 11 years of photographs, porches, back doors, windows, gray mornings, objects placed where they needed to be. Sometimes I look through them. Not often. Only when I need to remind myself that the work is real. It is like looking at anything you built with your own hands over many years. A carpenter might look at old cabinets. A painter might study old walls. I look at doors I close carefully and houses I left quiet. I am not a monster. I want that understood. I have never enjoyed any of it. I have never stayed longer than needed. I do not hurt people because I hate them. I do not choose the stops. I wake up knowing. That is all. The knowledge comes before I open my eyes. A house, a face, sometimes an object, sometimes a method. By the time I get dressed, the details are as clear as the addresses in the app. I have tried to ignore it. Once. It happened in my 3rd year. The stop was a yellow house on Fern Street. A young couple lived there with 2 children. I liked them. The little girl used to wait behind the screen door and wave when I placed the order down. Her brother would stand behind her and make faces. That morning, the house appeared in my mind before I woke. I knew what had to happen. I sat on the edge of my bed for almost an hour. My wife asked if I was sick. I told her I had eaten something bad. Then I went to work and drove past the yellow house. I did not stop. For the next 5 minutes, I felt proud. I thought I had proved there was a choice. Then my van turned right on its own. I tried to hold the wheel straight. My hands did not listen. The engine grew louder even though my foot was not pressing the gas. I drove around the block and returned to Fern Street. The little girl was waiting at the screen door. She waved. I cried while I waved back. Afterward, I understood. The route does not ask. The route does not care whether I agree. I am only the person carrying it out. Whatever comes after happens the way accidents happen. Slow, sad, nobody's fault. The street grieves, casseroles appear on porches, flowers arrive. People gather and speak quietly. Then the signs disappear. The house is painted. A new family moves in. The neighborhood heals. The orders continue. Milk, eggs, orange juice. I have buried half of Cedar Hollow and taken care of the other half. Every one of them waves at me. That part still surprises me. The children hear the van and run down the driveway. There's the milkman! There's our guy. Parents stand behind them in dressing gowns, holding coffee and smiling. Sometimes they give me Christmas cards. Sometimes they leave a small tip taped under the cooler. I keep every card. My wife says I am sentimental. Maybe I am. I have spent years wondering who decides. There are mornings when I reach the final stop, turn off the engine, and sit alone in the van, listening to the metal cool. No letter ever arrives. Nobody calls. There is no voice telling me what I have done or why. I simply know the stops. Sometimes I imagine there are others like me. A mail carrier who leaves certain envelopes that are not in the sorting system. A meter reader who enters certain houses and never records the numbers. A school bus driver who takes one extra turn on quiet mornings. A nurse who knows which dose must be slightly different. Maybe the whole world runs on two routes, the one people can see and the one beneath it. The normal route carries groceries, letters, children, medicine, and bills. The second route keeps something balanced, the numbers, the timing, who stays and who leaves. Maybe someone has always had to do it. Maybe the world would break if we stopped. That is what I tell myself. You have to tell yourself something. My wife does not know. Her name is Laura. We have been married for 19 years. She knows I wake early. She knows I take pride in my work. She knows I can name almost every family in Cedar Hollow. She does not know about the other phone. She does not know about the photographs. She does not know that sometimes I wash blood from beneath my nails before coming home. Laura believes I am good. That has always been the hardest part. She tells people I am the kindest man she knows. When neighbors need help moving furniture, she volunteers me. When someone's car will not start, she says, "Call him, he'll know what to do." I usually do. I fix things. That is what I have always done. We bought the little gray house at the end of Bell Lane 9 years ago. It has a good porch and a small garden in the back. Laura grows tomatoes there every summer, though squirrels eat more of them than we do. Last spring, she hung a wind chime beside the front window. I told her it would keep us awake. She said that was the point. It makes the house sound alive, she told me. She likes standing at the window when I return from work. She hears the van before she sees it. Then she lifts both arms over her head and waves as if I have been gone for a year instead of a few hours. I wave back every time. It is our little joke. This morning, I woke at 3:47. My alarm was set for 4. The room was dark. Laura slept beside me, with one hand beneath her cheek. I knew the route. There were 6 houses that were not in the app. That was more than usual. Most mornings there is only 1, sometimes 2. 6 meant it would be a long morning. I lay still and listened to Laura breathe. For a moment, I did not move. The first house appeared in my mind. A brick home on Parker Avenue. Then a white bungalow on Eastwood. Then an apartment above the pharmacy. Then the Pruitt house. Then old Mr. Petrie. Then the 6th. The little gray house at the end of Bell Lane. My house. I closed my eyes. The knowledge remained. I turned toward Laura. Her face was peaceful. A thin line of gray morning light had not yet reached the curtains, but I could see the shape of her beside me. I wanted to wake her. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to say there was another route and her name had appeared on it. Instead, I got out of bed. I dressed in the bathroom so the light would not wake her. My uniform felt heavier than usual. Before leaving, I stood beside the bed. Laura opened her eyes slightly. "Morning already?" she asked. "Go back to sleep," she smiled. "Bring home coffee." "I will." She closed her eyes. I left the house at 4:16. The first 5 stops are finished now. The brick house on Parker Avenue took less than a minute. The white bungalow took 6. The apartment above the pharmacy was difficult because the stairwell camera had been replaced. The Pruitt house was quiet. The boy's bicycle lay in the driveway again. I moved it aside so no one would run over it. Mr. Petrie was the 5th. That one hurt. I placed his milk behind the flower pot after. Old habits. Now I'm sitting in my van at the corner of Bell Lane. The app says the route is complete. A green message fills the screen. Great work. All deliveries completed. The cooler motor hums behind me. The sun is up now, but the sky is still gray. My house is visible at the end of the street. The little garden, the good porch, the wind chime moving in the morning breeze. Laura will be awake. The coffee will be on. She will hear the van in a moment. I know what I must do. I knew before I opened my eyes. The knowledge is inside me like a second heartbeat. I keep both hands on the steering wheel. I tell myself to turn left, drive away, leave town, drive until the van runs out of fuel. But my foot presses the gas. The van moves forward, slowly. The wind chime becomes louder as I approach. Laura appears at the front window. She wears the old blue robe I bought her 3 Christmases ago. A coffee mug is in one hand. Her face lights up when she sees me. Then she lifts both arms and waves. Big, happy, like she always does. My hands shake on the wheel. I wave back. The van stops in front of the house. I turn off the engine. For the first time in 11 years, the cooler motor goes silent. The whole street seems to hold its breath. Laura steps away from the window. She is coming to the door. I look down at the passenger side footwell. There is something there. I did not put it in the van. I knew there would be. The front door opens. Laura stands on the porch, smiling. "You finished early," she calls. I open my door. My legs carry me toward the house. She watches me approach, still smiling, still trusting. I think about every family on the route. Every locked gate opened for me. Every window pointed out. Every side door left unlocked. The route is the most trusted thing in their lives, and I am part of it. Laura reaches out when I climb the porch steps. "What's wrong?" she asks. I try to answer. Nothing comes. She touches my face. Her fingers are warm. "You look pale." I want to tell her to run. I want to tell her not to let me inside. I want to tell her that I love her and that none of this was ever my choice. But my hand is already moving toward the door. She steps aside. The house smells like coffee. The wind chime rings behind us. I have run this route for 11 years. Thousands of mornings, hundreds of streets, dozens of houses that were never in the app. I have never been late. I have never left a delivery unfinished. I have never once skipped a house. And the route knows that. Story 3. The world has changed completely since the cats took over. There was a time when everything felt normal. Children went to school every morning. Parents went to work, came home, and ate dinner with their families. People complained about traffic, bills, and bad weather because those were the worst things most of us had to worry about. All of that disappeared because of the cats. I do not know how many people are still alive. I do not even know whether another human being will ever find what I have written. There is no reason to tell you my name. It would mean nothing now, but I can tell you what happened during what I believed would be my final days on Earth. Before the cats began their reign, I worked as a veterinarian at the city zoo. I mainly cared for the larger animals, including the bears, elephants, and the zoo's only lion. His name was Roger. Roger was a 14-year-old Congo lion who had lived in captivity since he was 2. Despite his size and strength, he was one of the gentlest animals I worked with. He trusted me. Whenever I entered his enclosure for a checkup, he would act like an oversized house cat. He would roll onto his side and wait for me to scratch under his chin. Sometimes he would expose his belly and stare at me until I rubbed it. I always spoiled him. I knew I was not supposed to treat him like a pet. He was still a wild animal, and no matter how friendly he seemed, he could kill a person in seconds. But Roger and I had known each other for years. I understood his moods. I knew when he was tired, annoyed, hungry, or playful. He knew my voice and often came to the gate when he heard me approaching. The night before everything changed, Roger behaved strangely. Before leaving work, I always visited him one final time. I would enter the protected section of the enclosure, scratch the top of his head, and tell him I would see him the next day. That night, Roger did not come to meet me. He sat in the open part of his enclosure, staring toward the sky. The sun had already set, and the first stars were appearing above the zoo. Roger's head was tilted slightly back. His eyes did not move. It almost looked as if he were watching something. "Roger, it's time for me to go," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" He did not react. His ears did not move toward my voice. His tail remained still. All of his attention stayed fixed on the sky. I walked closer and called his name again. Nothing. I found it unusual, but Roger was getting old. I hated thinking about it, but I knew his age could be affecting him. Large cats could develop neurological problems, just like people. I decided I would give him a complete examination in the morning. The next day I arrived early. Roger was still staring upward. He allowed me to examine him, but he showed none of his usual affection. He did not press his head against my arm or roll onto his side. His expression was empty. He looked like a statue. I checked his eyes, ears, breathing, temperature, and movement. Everything appeared normal. During the rest of the day, he barely changed position. He continued staring at the sky. Now, when I think back, I understand that it was a warning. I should have realized that something was coming. The zoo closed early because it was New Year's Eve. Most of the staff left before sunset to celebrate with friends and family. I stayed behind to perform a full examination on Roger. I gave him an anesthetic. It took about 5 minutes for him to fall asleep. Once he was unconscious, I checked everything I could. His weight had not changed. His teeth and gums were healthy for his age. His blood showed no signs of infection or disease. I took x-rays of his entire body. There was nothing wrong with him. I stood beside him and ran my fingers through his mane. There was no medical reason for his behavior. I began to think the problem was me. Maybe I had been working too much. Maybe stress had made me see danger where there was none. Roger might have been watching a plane or a distant light in the sky. When he woke, I guided him back into his enclosure. He walked slowly but normally. I gave him my usual goodbye and turned toward the exit. God is coming. The voice came from behind me. It was deep and rough, almost like an animal growling words through a damaged throat. I stopped. Every hair on my body rose. I turned around. Roger sat in the middle of the enclosure, looking upward. There was no one else inside. I checked behind the walls, gates, and feeding area. I thought someone might have broken into the zoo and was hiding nearby. No one was there. I looked toward the sky. A dim blue light floated high above the zoo. It was difficult to see clearly, but it appeared to be shaped like a disc. For several seconds I watched it without moving. Maybe it was a plane, maybe it was a helicopter. That was what I told myself. Still, something felt wrong. Before leaving, I contacted the night guard and warned him that there might be an intruder on the property. People occasionally broke into the zoo on New Year's Eve. They would be drunk, high, or looking for some foolish adventure. The guard promised to remain alert. After making sure he understood, I drove home. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice. God is coming. At 2:54 in the morning, I finally gave up. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the clock. Roger had never spoken before. Lions could make many sounds, but they could not form words. I told myself I had imagined it, but what if I had not? The zoo was about 30 minutes away. Driving across the city in the middle of the night was a bad idea, especially on New Year's Eve. I went anyway. The city was still filled with drunk people and partygoers. I passed a woman vomiting on the pavement while her friends held back her hair. A naked man walked into the road and raised both hands at my car. When I honked, he gave me the middle finger. I swerved around him. None of that surprised me. What frightened me were the cats. At first, I saw 3 strays sitting together near a rubbish bin. A few streets later, I saw 8 cats standing in a line beside the road. Then I passed a group of nearly 20. They were different colors, sizes, and breeds. Some looked healthy and well cared for. Others were thin strays with torn ears and dirty fur. They all faced the same direction, toward the zoo. I tried not to think about it. I kept driving. When I arrived, I parked near the veterinary building and used my work keys to enter. The hallway lights flickered on. I froze. Broken glass covered the floor farther down the corridor. A trail of blood led away from it. My first thought was that a drunk person had broken in and attacked the night guard with a bottle. I pulled out my phone and called the police. The call failed immediately. I tried again. Nothing. The phone showed no signal. I searched my handbag for something I could use as a weapon. I had no knife or gun. I placed my keys between my fingers, creating a weak set of metal claws. It was not much, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. I followed the blood. The trail led out of the veterinary area and toward the public exhibits. Most of the lights were off. I turned on my phone's flashlight and held it in front of me. The darkness swallowed everything beyond the narrow beam. For a moment, I felt like the main character in a horror game, searching an abandoned building for clues. That thought stopped being amusing very quickly. The blood trail suddenly ended. I searched nearby paths and doors, but I found nothing. Eventually, I sat on a bench to catch my breath. Only then did I realize I was sitting in front of Roger's enclosure. I lifted the flashlight. My hand went weak. The phone fell to the ground. A bloody handprint covered the inside of the enclosure glass. I ran toward the staff entrance. When I reached the inner enclosure, I saw Roger. The night guard's neck was inside his mouth. The man was still alive. One of his hands gripped Roger's large teeth, trying to keep them from sinking deeper. His other hand reached toward me. His eyes begged for help. Roger's fangs had barely missed the main artery in the man's neck, but blood already ran across his uniform. God is here. The words were muffled. At first I thought the guard had spoken, but he could not move his throat without Roger's teeth cutting deeper. Roger opened his mouth. The guard dropped to the ground. He shook violently as blood leaked from the holes in his neck. Then Roger spoke again. God is here. The voice came from him. There was no doubt. My legs began to shake. Lions could not talk. Nothing I knew about biology or medicine could explain what I had just heard. Roger looked toward the sky. A disc-shaped object appeared above the enclosure. Its lights were brighter than anything I had ever seen. White and blue beams moved across the ground. An opening formed beneath the object. A pale column of light stretched down from it. Something moved inside. At first, I could only see a shadow. It had the shape of a cat, but it was much larger than any animal on Earth. The figure jumped from the light. It landed with perfect grace, almost like an angel descending from heaven. The moment its feet touched the ground, the entire zoo seemed to shake. The creature sat upright. Light shone from its face. Then I realized it did not have a normal face. It wore a mask. The mask resembled the face of an ancient Egyptian cat statue. Its eyes glowed, and its smooth mouth curved into an expression that was neither kind nor cruel. The body beneath it was enormous and covered in black fur. "Angel," Roger said. He nudged the injured guard toward the creature. "Angel, angel, angel." The mouth of the mask opened. A long tongue slid from inside. It wrapped around the guard's body. The man tried to scream, but only a wet noise came from his damaged throat. The tongue pulled him into the creature's mouth. The mask closed. A heavy crunch echoed through the enclosure. Blood poured from beneath the mask like a waterfall. Warm liquid spread down my legs. I had lost control of my bladder. Roger turned toward me. He began walking slowly in my direction. "Preserve," he said. The light from the creature's eyes moved over my body. Its gaze felt gentle. That was the most terrifying part. I felt as though it were trying to comfort me. It seemed to be saying that everything would be all right. Suddenly, Roger and the creature both looked away. The entire zoo erupted. Animals roared, screamed, howled, and struck their enclosures. The noise sounded like every demon in hell had declared war against heaven. The giant creature broke through the enclosure glass without slowing down and moved toward the other animals. Roger watched it leave. While they were distracted, I ran. I did not look back. I sprinted toward my car, unlocked the door, and threw myself inside. My hands shook so badly that I could not place the key into the ignition. When the engine finally started, the headlights illuminated the veterinary entrance. Roger stood there. I screamed. He ran toward me and jumped onto the windshield. His claws scraped across the glass as he climbed onto the roof. I shifted into reverse and pressed the accelerator. "Preserve!" he called. I slammed on the brakes. Roger flew from the roof and struck the pavement in front of my car. "I'm sorry," I cried. "Roger, I'm sorry." He stood again. There were no visible injuries on his body. He began walking toward me. "Friend," he said. I put the car into gear and started moving. A truck suddenly appeared from the side. Roger struck the side of my car with his head, pushing me away from its path. The truck hit him instead. His body rolled beneath the wheels. He had protected me. I struggled with my seatbelt and fell from the car. I reached toward his broken body, sobbing. Roger was dead because he had saved me. I wanted to go to him. Before I could move, two giant creatures jumped from behind me and landed on the truck. They tore through the metal as if it were paper. One ripped open the roof. The other pulled the driver out with its teeth. They tore the man in half. His body separated with a wet cracking sound. I crawled back into my car. The engine would not start. The driver's remains fell onto the road behind me. The two creatures turned toward my vehicle. They approached slowly, the way predators stalk injured prey. I clasped my hands and prayed. Tears fell onto my fingers. Then I heard the chopping sound of helicopter blades. A military helicopter appeared overhead. Searchlights covered the creatures. For the first time, I saw them clearly. They had feline bodies, but they were much larger than elephants. Their fur was so black that it seemed to absorb the light. They looked like living sphinx statues. "Fire!" someone shouted from the helicopter. A gun turret opened fire. Bullets tore through the creatures' bodies. They did not react. They jumped toward the helicopter as if playing with an insect. One of them caught the aircraft between its claws. It pulled the helicopter down and smashed it against the road. The explosion lit the entire area. I did not stay to see whether the creatures survived. My engine started. I drove home as fast as I could. The city had become hell. Cats attacked people in the streets. Giant creatures moved between buildings. I saw a group of house cats pull a child beneath a parked car. A creature broke through the wall of an apartment building and dragged people from the rooms. I heard bodies strike the road beneath my tires. Once, I heard a man grunt. I did not stop. I told myself there was nothing I could do. When I reached home, I ran inside and locked the door. A woman and her young son saw me. They ran toward the house and begged me to let them in. I did not open the door. I do not want to describe what I heard afterward. It is still one of the worst things I have ever done. That was 2 months ago. The giant creatures the cats called angels destroyed most of humanity in 12 days. The cats took control of what remained. Cats do not stay dead anymore. Their bodies repair themselves no matter how badly they are injured. Bones reconnect. Skin closes. Organs return to their places. Sometimes I hear human voices outside my house. I cannot tell whether they belong to survivors or cats copying the people they killed. I never answer. If the cats learn my voice, they might use it to lure other survivors from hiding. I never saw Roger again after that first night. If he was like the other cats, he would have regenerated. He might still be walking through the city, calling to the angels whenever he finds another victim. I remained barricaded inside my house. I had gone shopping a few days before New Year's Eve, so I had enough food to survive for a while. But eventually, my supplies ran low. I was left with 2 bottles of water, half a loaf of moldy bread, and 1 can of ravioli. I had no choice. I had to leave. I moved the shelves I had placed against the front door and carefully stepped outside. A Walmart stood about 20 minutes away. The journey took nearly 30, because I had to hide from a sleeping angel lying in the middle of the road. The store had already been looted. Shelves were empty, windows were broken, and rubbish covered the floor. People had taken almost everything during the first days of the disaster. I did not blame them. They had only been trying to survive. Still, I wish they had left something behind. After searching every aisle, I found several cans of spaghetti and meatballs, half a pallet of expired soda, and a box of bandages. I placed everything I could carry into my backpack. One of the soda cans slipped from my hand. It struck the floor and burst open. The drink sprayed across the tiles with a loud hiss. I froze. Then I grabbed the can and threw it toward the other side of the store. It was too late. When I stepped into the main aisle, dozens of glowing eyes stared at me from the darkness. The cats had been inside the entire time. Some stretched their backs. Others yawned and slowly stood. "Angel," they said. Their voices were different, but the word was the same. "Angel, angel." They began walking toward me. I turned and ran. The cats followed at a slow pace. They did not need to hurry. In the distance, something large galloped toward the store. The car park was wide and open. Only a few damaged vehicles offered any cover. I climbed inside an abandoned bus. Seconds later, an angel arrived. Cats moved around it, searching between the vehicles. I held my breath. For a long time, I heard nothing. Then, a man screamed. He must have been hiding nearby. "No!" he shouted. "Stop! Go away!" His scream ended with a sound like a broken toy. Through the bus window, I saw the angel pressing one paw onto him. The man's body burst. His insides pushed out from beneath the creature's foot. I escaped through the other side of the bus while it was distracted. The cats saw me. The angel turned. I ran between the ruined buildings. Ahead, I saw a narrow space between two collapsed walls. The opening was too small for the angel. I squeezed through. The cats reached beneath the broken stones, trying to catch my ankles. The angel rammed its head against the buildings. Dust and pieces of concrete fell around me. It was not going to give up easily. I looked for another place to hide. Then I recognized the area. The zoo stood nearby. I had worked there for more than 10 years. I ran toward the veterinary building. Somehow, it was still standing. I entered and pushed heavy cabinets against the door. Then, I hid inside a locker. The cats scratched outside. They used stolen human voices. "Hello?" one called. "Please let me in," another begged. "They're coming. Open the door." Some sounded like men. Some sounded like women. One sounded like a child. I covered my mouth to keep from making a sound. How many people had those cats killed to collect so many voices? Soon several angels arrived. The building shook as they searched around it. After nearly an hour, the cats and angels finally left. I slowly opened the locker. The building was quiet. I searched my old office and found medical supplies that had somehow remained untouched. Then I left through the exhibit area. The zoo was in ruins. Plants covered the paths. Vines grew over broken fences. Trees and bushes had spread through the empty enclosures. It looked like a jungle. There were no animals. I walked through the abandoned zoo, filled with memories. I remembered families standing near the exhibits. I remembered children laughing. I remembered feeding times, medical checks, and staff meetings. Then I reached Roger's enclosure. I stopped. Memories returned all at once. I remembered the day Roger arrived. I remembered his birthdays, when the keepers gave him steaks stacked like pancakes. I remembered late nights when I would sit near his enclosure and tell him about my problems. He had always listened. Tears ran down my face. I missed him. I missed my old life. I lowered my head and gripped the guardrail. Bushes moved inside the enclosure across from me. For one brief second, I hoped it was Roger. Then fear replaced the hope. The first thing I saw was white fur. Large patches were missing. A huge figure walked from behind the plants on its knuckles. Its face was pale pink, and its teeth were exposed. I recognized it. Charles. Charles was the zoo's albino gorilla. He stood upright and beat his chest. The sound was like thunder. Even after covering my ears, I felt it vibrating inside my skull. Charles roared. Then he charged. I ran. I had no destination. I only knew I had to keep moving. I could not outrun a gorilla in a straight line, so I turned constantly, moving between walls, trees, and broken exhibits. Charles crashed through vines and struck the walls as he followed. Ahead, I saw the zoo entrance. The main gates had been destroyed, but the smaller walkway remained narrow. I ran toward it. Charles was so close that I could hear his breathing behind me. If he stretched out his arm, he could have grabbed my neck. I passed through the entrance. Charles hit the narrow gateway. He grabbed the sides and shook them. He roared into my face. Saliva sprayed across my skin. I turned to run. Then I saw Roger. He stood in front of me. "Preserve," he said. I dropped to my knees. I was finished. There was no point in running. There was no point in living. Every day was fear, hunger, death, and hiding. I had nothing left. Something struck me from behind. Charles had broken through the gateway. He threw me aside and attacked Roger. My body struck a wall. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, several minutes had passed. Roger's body had been torn in half. Charles stood over him, holding one piece in each hand. His white fur was covered in blood. He roared and slammed Roger's remains onto the ground. Then he noticed me. He beat his chest and charged. All of his attention remained fixed on me. He did not see Roger's body healing. Roger's organs moved back together, his bones connected, his skin closed like two pieces of fabric being pulled together. Before Charles reached me, Roger attacked. He jumped onto the gorilla and closed his jaws around Charles's head. Roger twisted. The gorilla's neck broke. Charles slid across the pavement and stopped moving. I tried to stand. My strength disappeared. Roger came toward me and lay across my body, holding back most of his weight. "God!" he called. "God! God! God!" 3 disc-shaped objects appeared in the sky. They moved into the shape of a triangle. White light formed between them. The beam fell over Roger and me. A huge black paw emerged from the light. It closed around both of us. The final word I heard was Roger's voice. Preserve. I do not know how long I remained unconscious. When I woke, darkness surrounded me. I tried to stand but felt as though I were falling into an endless sea of soft black fur. A golden light appeared. It blinded me. When my vision returned, I saw something shaped like a moon. A long black line ran through its center. Then the moon closed. It was an eye. A voice spoke in a language that did not belong to Earth. The eye opened and closed as the voice continued. "I can't understand you," I shouted. "Where am I?" The eye closed again. A white flash surrounded me. Stars and colorful planets appeared in every direction. I was floating in space. Something moved behind me. I turned. The golden eye appeared again, but now I could see the creature around it. An enormous black body stretched beyond my sight. It was soft and graceful, with the shape of a cat and a long tail like a serpent. The disc-shaped ships emerged from its body. They traveled toward the planets around us. Some planets were empty. Others held creatures that looked like beings from science fiction stories. On some worlds, cats lived peacefully beside the native species. On others, the angels attacked and slaughtered everything, just as they had done on Earth. The enormous black being visited the peaceful planets. I wondered why some were spared while others were destroyed. Then I saw an answer. Asteroids moved toward one planet. Before they struck, the cats left. Their old world was destroyed. The surviving cats traveled to another planet where their kind already lived peacefully beside the native population. Soon after arriving, they attacked. The angels killed almost every living creature. Only a few were saved. A giant black paw carried them away, just as it had carried me. I watched countless generations of cats spread across the universe. They arrived on new worlds. They lived beside other species. They waited. When another cat world died, they took control of a new one. Most of the population was killed. A small number were preserved. Then I saw Earth. The disc-shaped ships arrived thousands of years ago. Some landed in Egypt. The people worshipped the cats and the enormous black being. They built temples, statues, and pyramids. Then the black being left. It continued traveling between worlds, repeating the same process. Earth had not been chosen by accident. The planet had been seeded. The cats lived beside us for thousands of years, waiting until the day they needed to harvest it. I vomited. Then I began to cry. Something rubbed against me. Roger stood beside me. He pressed his head against my body just as he had done during his examinations. "Preserve," he said. The word echoed through my mind. I remembered the small number of survivors taken from every conquered planet. Why were only a few preserved? Why had I been chosen? Had it been random? Roger licked my face. Then I understood. He remembered every moment of kindness I had shown him. I had cared for him. I had protected him. I had treated him as a friend. He saw me the same way. Roger helped me stand. I followed him deeper into the black being. The darkness became lighter. Cage-like rooms appeared around us. Each one contained different species from different planets. Humans were there too. Cats lived beside all of them. The cages looked like zoo exhibits. Inside, every preserved creature appeared peaceful. They were safe. They were fed. They lived beside the cats who had chosen them. This was my future. I would spend the rest of my life with Roger. I would be cared for while more planets suffered the same fate as Earth. More civilizations would be destroyed. more survivors would be taken. There was nothing I could do to stop it. If you are reading this, then you have also been preserved. I am probably dead by now. But I want you to understand something. You were not chosen by accident. Your cat remembered your kindness. You gave it food, warmth, safety, and love. Now it will do the same for you. You will be protected. You will be cared for. You will be loved for the rest of your life. You have nothing to fear. Story 4. Leo woke to the sharp tapping of a guard's baton against the bars of his cell. Up! Morning count. The sound dragged him out of a restless sleep. He opened his eyes and stared at the gray ceiling for a few seconds, trying to remember where he was. Then the smell of sweat, damp concrete, and old metal filled his nose, and everything came back. Prison. He pushed himself upright on the lower bunk. Above him, his cellmate, Tom, was already moving. The older man climbed down from the top bunk without looking at Leo. He landed lightly on the floor, straightened his prison clothes, and stood near the bars. Leo stood beside him. They did not exchange a word. That was normal. When Leo had first been assigned to the cell, he had tried to speak to Tom. He asked where he was from, how long he had been inside, and what work detail he had. Tom either ignored him or answered with one word. The strange thing was that Tom was not quiet with anyone else. In the yard, he laughed with other prisoners. In the commissary line, he spoke easily. Leo had even heard him tell long stories about his life before prison. But whenever Leo came close, Tom's expression changed. He would go silent. Sometimes he would move away without any explanation. Leo had stopped trying to understand it. When the morning count was finished, the doors opened one by one. Prisoners shuffled into the corridor and joined a line that stretched through the whole cell block. No one looked rested. Men coughed, rubbed their eyes, and dragged their feet along the floor. Guards stood nearby with batons in hand, watching for any reason to use them. Leo followed the line towards the mess hall. He did not speak. No one spoke to him. The breakfast was exactly what he expected, a pale, wet mixture that looked as though it had been scooped from the bottom of a dirty sink. A piece of dry bread sat beside it, along with a plastic cup filled with stale water. Leo carried his tray across the room. There were empty seats at several tables, but every time he moved towards one, the prisoners sitting there shifted slightly. Some placed their arms across the open spaces. Others simply stared at him until he moved on. He finally sat alone near the far wall. The other prisoners had been doing this since his first day. At first, it had made him angry. Then it confused him. Leo was not a serial killer. He had not assaulted women or children. As far as anyone officially knew, he had been locked up for destroying public property, being drunk and disorderly, and starting a fight he had badly lost. The ridge across his nose was still visible from where it had broken against the pavement. Compared with many of the men around him, Leo's crimes seemed small. There were murderers in the room, armed robbers, gang members, men who had done things Leo did not even want to imagine. Yet they looked at him as though he were the worst of them all. During his first few days, several prisoners had approached him. Each time, it appeared they wanted to introduce themselves or ask a question. Then they looked into his eyes. Every one of them stopped. Some frowned. Others looked suddenly uncomfortable. One man crossed himself before turning away. No one explained why. Leo had eventually decided being ignored was better than becoming too popular. Many prisoners had not seen a woman in years, and Leo had heard enough stories about what happened to men who attracted the wrong kind of attention. So he lowered his head and ate. The food tasted like wet paper. He forced it down and washed it away with water. The morning passed without violence. That was unusual. No fights broke out in the cell block. No one threw a tray in the mess hall. The guards did not have an excuse to swing their batons into anyone's ribs or back. Leo completed his work detail in silence. He spent hours carrying boxes, cleaning tools, and moving supplies from one storage room to another. The men working beside him avoided standing too close. At lunch, he ate alone again. After several more hours of dull labor, bells rang through the prison. The prisoners were finally allowed a short period of free time. Leo followed the others into the yard. The afternoon sky was pale and cloudy. High concrete walls surrounded the open area. with coils of razor wire running along the top. Guards watched from raised towers. Some prisoners lifted weights. Others walked in groups or stood near the fence, speaking quietly. Leo wandered towards an empty bench. As he sat down, he realized he had not spoken a single word all day. The thought made him uncomfortable. He opened his mouth and almost said something to himself, just to hear his own voice, but stopped. He did not want anyone to think he was losing his mind. He would soon get an opportunity to speak. Near the end of yard time, a tall, heavy man separated from a group of prisoners and began walking towards him. His name was Brick. No one knew whether that was his real name. He had received it after attacking his first cellmate with a brick while working on a construction crew. The cellmate had been known for hurting children. Brick had apparently decided to show him what he thought of that. Afterwards, Brick was never allowed near construction materials again. He was enormous. His shoulders were wide, and his stomach stretched against his prison shirt. He moved slowly, taking long, deliberate steps. It was obvious he wanted everyone to watch. Prisoners stopped talking, men turned away from their card games and weightlifting. Even the guards seemed to pay closer attention. Brick stopped in front of Leo. Leo remained seated for a moment, then stood. They faced each other. Up close, Brick looked even larger. Leo's eyes were level with the man's chest. "What do you want?" Leo asked. It was the first sentence he had spoken all day. Brick studied him. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he leaned closer. "I know what you did." Leo felt his stomach tighten. "You don't know anything?" Brick's expression filled with disgust. "I can see it." "See what?" "The fire." Leo froze. Brick pulled back his fist. The entire yard seemed to hold its breath. Then men began shouting, encouraging Brick to strike. Brick was fast, but Leo was faster. Leo had always known someone might attack him in prison. The others had not avoided him because of his bad breath. They despised him, though he had never understood how they knew enough to feel that way. So, he had prepared. Every night, while Tom slept above him, Leo scraped the handle of his plastic toothbrush against the concrete floor. Slowly, he sharpened it into a rough point. It was short and ugly, but it was better than having no weapon. Leo pulled it from his waistband. Brick's fist was still moving backwards when Leo drove the sharpened plastic into his stomach. Once. Brick made a strange sound. Leo stabbed him again, then a third time. The weapon slid into the thick flesh with a wet, soft noise. Brick cried out. The sound was not exactly one of pain. He sounded surprised, almost offended, as though someone had taken his place in a crowded line. He looked down at the toothbrush sticking out of his stomach. Blood spread across his shirt. For one frozen second, no one moved. Then the yard exploded. Prisoners shouted. Whistles screamed. Guards rushed through the gates with batons raised. Brick dropped to his knees. Leo released the weapon and immediately lowered himself to the ground. He placed his hands behind his head and laced his fingers together. He had no intention of giving the guards a reason to beat him. The other prisoners were not so lucky. Some tried to move away. Others pushed towards the fight to see what had happened. The guards attacked them all. Batons struck backs, arms, legs, and heads. Men screamed and fell. 17 prisoners were injured before order was restored. Leo remained kneeling throughout it all. If the other inmates had hated him before, they would hate him even more now. They had been beaten because of what he had done, while he had avoided most of the punishment by surrendering quickly. Brick was carried away on a stretcher. Leo was dragged inside and placed in restraints. Hours later, a guard informed him that Brick would survive. All 3 wounds had missed major organs. Leo almost laughed. Perhaps Brick's thick layer of body fat had protected him. Leo did not understand how anyone could become so large while eating prison food. But in this case, it had probably saved the man's life. Because Brick survived, Leo would spend 7 months in solitary confinement. If Brick had died, the punishment would have been much worse. Leo would still be transferred to a higher security prison, and 6 additional years would be added to his sentence. But first came the hole. Leo had heard stories about solitary confinement. People lost their minds in there. Some began talking to themselves. Others saw people who were not present. A few attacked the walls until their hands were broken. The guard said it happened because of loneliness. Leo was not worried about that. He had already spent most of his prison sentence being ignored. If a lack of human contact could make him insane, it should have happened long ago. He also believed the boredom could not be much worse than ordinary prison life. He discovered how wrong he was during the first day. The solitary cell was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a metal toilet, and a few steps of open floor. The walls were plain concrete. A small window sat high above him, too narrow to see through properly. The solid door had only two openings, one at eye level and another near the floor for food trays. There was nothing to read, nothing to touch, nothing to hear except distant footsteps and the occasional cry of another prisoner. Time slowed. Leo paced from one wall to the other, 4 steps forward, turn, 4 steps back. He performed push-ups until his arms shook. Then he did sit-ups. After that, he counted cracks in the wall. When dinner finally arrived, it felt as though 7 months had already passed. For the first time, fear entered his mind. That evening, Leo decided the fewer hours he spent awake, the better. He lay on the narrow mattress and closed his eyes. Sleep did not come easily. Every time he began to relax, he heard the wet sound of the toothbrush entering Brick's stomach. He imagined the man's surprised face. Then he noticed another sound, crackling. It was faint and irregular. At first, Leo assumed it came from the prison's old electrical system. Perhaps a light was damaged somewhere in the corridor, but the sound seemed to come from inside his cell. It followed him as he drifted into a restless sleep. His dreams were hot and confused. He saw orange light moving across walls. He smelled smoke. Somewhere far away, a child was crying. Leo woke suddenly. A loud crash echoed through the cell. It sounded like a glass bottle breaking. He sat upright. The room was almost completely dark. Only a thin line of light entered beneath the door. Leo stared around the cell. There was nothing near the toilet, nothing against the walls, nothing beside the door. Then he looked towards the foot of his bed. 2 small eyes floated in the darkness. They were at the height of a child's face. At first, Leo thought they reflected the weak light from beneath the door. Then he realized the light came from inside them. The eyes flickered. A fire burned within them. Leo screamed, "Help! Somebody help me!" His voice struck the walls and returned to him, louder and more desperate. "There's someone in here. I'm not alone." The eyes vanished the moment he spoke. Leo jumped from the bed and rushed to the door. He pounded his fists against it. "Guard! Open the door!" Footsteps approached. A small metal cover slid aside, revealing the viewing slot. Leo jumped when a pair of eyes appeared. It was only a guard. "Get back from the door!" the man shouted. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." There was someone in here. The guard looked around as much as he could through the opening. "There's nobody in there. I saw eyes. Go to sleep." "I swear there was a child standing near my bed." The guard's face became annoyed. "There is no child in a maximum security prison cell. Please, you have to let me out." The guard checked that Leo was not injured, then closed the slot. Leo continued shouting, but the man walked away. Through the door, Leo heard him mutter, "First night. That has to be some kind of record." His footsteps became quieter. Leo was alone again. He did not sleep for the rest of the night. He sat in the corner with his arms wrapped around his knees. His eyes moved from the bed to the toilet, then to the door. His heartbeat filled his ears. Beneath it, he could still hear the crackling. The sound was weak but constant. When sunlight finally entered through the high window, Leo felt some of the fear leave his body. He told the guards again when they brought breakfast. They laughed. At lunch, he demanded to speak with someone in charge. No one listened. By the afternoon, the guards stopped coming to the door when he shouted. As the sunlight began fading, Leo's fear returned. It felt physical. A heavy stone seemed to form inside his stomach. Cold settled into his bones. His throat became sore even before he began screaming. He understood he could not stay awake for 7 months. But he was going to try. During the first full night, Leo pinched the skin of his arms whenever his eyelids became heavy. At first, it worked. Later, when the pain was no longer enough, he struck his head against the wall. Each impact left him dizzy, but awake. The crackling grew louder as the night continued. By morning, it sounded like a fire burning behind the walls. Then sunlight entered the room, and the noise became quiet again. The cell smelled of sweat and fear. Leo spent the next day pacing. He tried to prepare himself for the second night. He slapped his face. He poured water over his head. He shouted songs and old advertisements he remembered from television. But exhaustion was stronger. At some point during the night, his eyelids began to flutter. He stood and tried to walk, but his legs shook. The crackling surrounded him. Leo sat on the edge of the bed for only a moment, his eyes closed. The dream began immediately. Leo was standing in his old workplace. He could smell alcohol. His boss stood in front of him, holding several empty bottles. "You're fired," the man said. Leo remembered the rage. He had worked there for years. Yes, he drank at his desk, but he still completed his work. He had convinced himself he was the most important person in the company. How dare his boss remove him? Leo began shouting. The dream moved quickly. His boss called security. Security escorted Leo from the building, while other employees watched. Leo went to his favorite bar. He drank until he could barely speak. The bartender told him to leave. Leo bought another bottle from a shop and wandered through the dark streets. He did not remember deciding to go to his boss's house. He only remembered standing outside it. The house was dark. Leo stared at the windows and imagined his boss sleeping peacefully after destroying his life. He became angry again. He removed his jacket and tore a strip of fabric from the lining. He soaked it in alcohol and pushed one end into the bottle. Then he took out a lighter. The flame danced in the night air. It was beautiful. Leo held it against the cloth. The fabric caught fire. He pulled his arm back and threw the bottle. It turned through the air. Then it struck an upstairs window. Glass shattered. Flames rushed across the curtains. Leo watched for a moment. He smiled. Then the fire spread faster than he expected. He heard a sound from inside the house. A scream. A child's scream. Leo ran. He told himself he had not known. He did not know the window belonged to a little girl's bedroom. He did not know his boss's daughter was sleeping inside. He did not know she was alone because her father was working late. Leo fled through the streets. He was still drunk when a stranger told him to stop. Angry words became a fight. Leo threw the first punch and missed. The stranger struck him. Leo's face hit the pavement. When he woke, he was in a police station. Investigators suspected him of starting the fire, but they could not prove it. There were no useful cameras. No one had seen him clearly. The bottle had burned, so they charged him only with the crimes they could prove: destruction of public property, drunk and disorderly conduct, assault. Leo went to prison. The dream changed. He was back in the solitary cell. The crackling was no longer quiet. It roared. Leo woke with a gasp. The air was hot. The two burning eyes floated at the foot of his bed. This time, they did not disappear. Smoke seemed to move around them, shaping the faint outline of a small child. Leo pressed himself against the wall. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The eyes burned brighter. "I didn't know." A voice came from the darkness. "You did hurt me." It belonged to a little girl. Her tone was soft, almost playful, but something ancient and angry lived beneath it. Leo shook his head. "I swear I didn't know there was anyone inside." "You're not sorry." "I am." "Not yet." Leo felt the heat touch his feet. He looked down. There were no flames, but the pain was real. It climbed from his toes to his ankles. Leo screamed. The invisible fire moved up his legs. His skin burned without changing. His body felt as though it was melting from the inside. He smelled his own flesh cooking. The heat reached his stomach and chest. Leo clawed at himself, trying to put out flames he could not see. His teeth cracked in his mouth. His eyes felt as though they were boiling. He screamed until his throat tore. Outside the cell, the guard on duty heard the noise. At first, he ignored it. Leo had been shouting since his first night in solitary. Prisoners often broke quickly in the hole. Then the guard heard something strange. There were two voices. One belonged to a grown man. The other belonged to a little girl. Both were screaming at the same time. The guard stood slowly. As he moved towards the cell, he began to understand the child's words. "Help me, Daddy!" The voice was filled with pain. "Daddy, where are you?" The guard's stomach turned. It hurts, Daddy. It hurts so bad. He reached the door and unlocked it. The moment he pulled it open, a wave of heat rushed into the corridor. He stepped back and raised one arm to protect his face. Then, the heat vanished. The cell was silent. Leo's body lay on the floor beside the bed. It had been completely burned. His skin was black and split. His bones and teeth had turned dark as coal. Nothing else in the cell was damaged. The mattress had not burned. The blanket was untouched. There were no marks on the walls. Even the paper cup near the toilet remained whole. The guards sealed the area. An investigation began. Officials searched for fuel, wiring problems, chemicals, or anything that could explain the fire. They found nothing. There was no evidence that anyone had entered the cell. The cameras showed only the guard opening the door. Prisoners were questioned. Investigators believed someone must have arranged the killing. Leo had made many enemies after attacking Brick, and dozens of men had reasons to hate him. But none of the inmates seemed surprised when they heard how he died. Some smiled, others simply nodded. Tom, Leo's old cellmate, refused to speak at first. When an investigator finally asked why everyone had avoided Leo, Tom looked towards the floor. "It was his eyes," he said. "What about them?" Tom took a long time to answer. There was something inside them. Several other prisoners gave the same explanation. One man said Leo's eyes appeared brighter whenever he became angry. Another claimed he could smell smoke whenever Leo walked past. Brick, still recovering in the prison hospital, told investigators that he had attacked Leo because he saw flames moving behind the man's eyes. The officials dismissed these statements as superstition. They wrote that the prisoners had created a story to explain their dislike of Leo. Still, every prisoner gave almost the exact same answer. It was his eyes, they said. There was a fire burning in them. One older inmate explained it more clearly than the others. "When he looked at you, it felt like you were looking through a window," the man said. And on the other side, there was a house burning. The investigator asked if Leo had ever confessed to starting a fire. The inmate shook his head. He didn't have to. How could you know what he did? The man glanced toward the solitary block. You could see it in him. The investigator closed his notebook. The prisoner leaned closer to the bars. "It was like he was already burning in hell," he whispered. Far away inside the empty solitary cell, something crackled softly in the darkness. Story 5. I should never have knocked back on the wall. I understand that now. At the time, it seemed harmless. Stupid perhaps, but harmless. It was only 3 taps against a bedroom wall in the middle of the night. I had no reason to believe that such a simple action could be understood as an invitation. My name is Mike, and I have lived in this house for almost 2 years. At least, I thought I had been living here alone. The house stands near the end of an old residential street, where most of the buildings are beginning to show their age. The paint is faded, the gutters lean away from the roofs, and weeds grow through the cracks in the sidewalks. Several houses have been empty for years. Mine is one of the oldest. It has 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a basement that always smells faintly of wet stone. The rent was much cheaper than anything else in the area, which should have made me suspicious. At the time, however, I was desperate. I had recently lost my job and needed somewhere affordable. The landlord accepted my application without checking my credit or asking many questions. He seemed eager to get someone into the house as quickly as possible. His name was Mr. Grady. He was a thin man in his late 60s with gray hair combed tightly against his head. Whenever I spoke to him, his eyes moved around my face without ever meeting mine. He had a habit of rubbing his hands together, even when the weather was warm. On the day I moved in, he gave me a quick tour. He showed me the kitchen, the bathroom, and the bedrooms. He pointed out a small leak beneath the kitchen sink and warned me that one of the upstairs windows sometimes opened during strong winds. Everything seemed normal until we reached the end of the upstairs hallway. There was a heavy wooden door beside the main bedroom. A metal deadbolt had been fixed across it. Unlike the other doors in the house, this one had no normal handle on the outside. There was only a round metal plate where the handle should have been, and a thick lock near the top. "What's in there?" I asked. "Storage," Mr. Grady replied. "Can I use it?" "No." He answered too quickly. I looked at him. He cleared his throat and stared at the floor. "The room has some of my property inside," he explained. "Old furniture, boxes, tools, nothing valuable, but I don't want it disturbed. Do you have the key?" He rubbed his hands together. "I lost it." "You lost the key to your own storage room?" "Yes." His eyes moved toward the door, then immediately away from it. "When?" "The day the previous tenant left." Something about the answer bothered me. "What happened to the previous tenant?" "He moved." "Where?" Mr. Grady frowned. "I'm not sure." The conversation ended there. I should have asked more questions, but I needed the house. The storage room was small, and I had plenty of space without it. I signed the rental agreement and moved in that weekend. For the first few months, nothing unusual happened. The house made noises at night, but old houses always do. Pipes clicked inside the walls. Floorboards groaned when the temperature changed. Wind moved through gaps around the windows. Sometimes I heard a faint scratching sound above the ceiling. I assumed mice or squirrels had entered the attic. The house never felt completely comfortable, though. It was not frightening at first. It simply felt occupied. I would enter a room and have the strong feeling that someone had left only seconds before. Sometimes I smelled cigarette smoke, even though I did not smoke. On several occasions, I found doors open after I was certain I had closed them. I blamed the wind. The sealed storage room was the only door that never moved. The deadbolt remained in place, and the wood around it looked untouched. I occasionally pressed my hand against the door, but I never heard anything inside. After a while, I stopped thinking about it. Then the knocking began. I do not remember the exact date of the first night. It was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. I woke suddenly and looked at the digital clock on my bedside table. 3:14 a.m. For several seconds, I did not know what had woken me. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 quiet knocks came from inside the wall beside my bed. I sat up. My bedroom shared that wall with the locked storage room. The sound seemed to come from somewhere behind the plaster, close to the floor. I listened carefully. Nothing happened. I told myself it had been part of a dream. Perhaps a pipe had moved inside the wall. Maybe an animal was scratching around in the storage room. I lay back down. It took me nearly an hour to fall asleep again. The next night, I woke at exactly the same time. 3:14 a.m. Tap, tap, tap. This time, the knocking was clearer. There were 3 separate strikes, each spaced evenly apart. It did not sound like an animal. It did not sound like wood shifting or pipes moving. Someone was knocking. I turned on the bedside lamp and stared at the wall. The plaster was old and covered in several layers of paint. A long crack ran from the ceiling to the corner, but nothing moved. I waited. The sound did not return. The third night was the same. At exactly 3:14 a.m., I opened my eyes. Tap, tap, tap. Every night after that, the knocking woke me at the same minute. It never came at 3:13. It never came at 3:15. Always 3:14. 3 taps. Then silence. During the day, I tried to find a reasonable explanation. I searched for signs of rats and insects. I checked the attic and looked around the outside of the house. I even placed a small recording device near the wall. The recording captured the sound perfectly. 3 knocks, clear, deliberate, human. I sent the recording to Mr. Grady and asked him to come inspect the house. He did not answer for 2 days. When he finally called, his voice sounded nervous. "Old houses make noises," he said. "This isn't the house settling. What do you want me to do about it?" "Open the storage room." There was a long silence. "I can't." "Why not?" "I told you. I lost the key." "Then we break the lock." "No." His answer was sharp. I had never heard him speak that way. "Do not open that room," he continued. "It is not included in the rental agreement. There might be an animal trapped inside." "There isn't." "How can you know that?" Another silence followed. Then he said, "Leave the room alone, Mike." He ended the call. That conversation should have frightened me enough to move out. Instead, it made me curious. Human beings are naturally curious. We want explanations, even when ignorance would protect us. We open doors we have been warned to leave shut. We read forbidden books. We look into dark places because not knowing feels worse than fear. Curiosity is often the first step toward ruin. The knocking continued. As the nights passed, I began noticing other details. The house always became colder shortly before 3:14 a.m. It did not matter whether the heating was running. The temperature in my bedroom would fall so quickly that my breath sometimes became visible. The knocking was always followed by a smell: damp soil, stagnant water, rusted metal. It reminded me of an old well or a flooded basement. Some nights, I heard something breathing behind the wall after the knocks. The sound was slow and weak, as if someone on the other side had been trapped without fresh air. Once, I placed my ear against the plaster during the day. I heard nothing. At night, I began sleeping with the television on. I hoped the noise would hide the tapping, but it never did. No matter how loud the television was, the 3 knocks came through clearly. Tap, tap, tap. They seemed to happen inside my head. I stopped sleeping properly. I became tired at work. I forgot simple things and lost track of conversations. Friends asked whether I was sick. I told them I was stressed. The truth sounded too ridiculous to explain. One night, I stayed at a hotel. I thought distance would help. At exactly 3:14 a.m., I woke in the hotel room. For several seconds, there was silence. Then someone knocked 3 times on the wall beside the bed. Tap, tap, tap. I checked out before sunrise. After that, I understood that whatever was knocking had not remained inside the house. It had connected itself to me. Still, I did not answer. Every night, the sound came. Every night, I remained silent. Then, last night, something changed. I had gone to bed earlier than usual because I had not slept properly in days. Before closing my eyes, I placed my phone on the table beside the bed and turned on the recording function. I remember dreaming about the storage room. In the dream, the door was open. A narrow staircase led downward into complete darkness. Someone stood at the bottom wearing my clothes. I could not see the person's face. When I tried to turn away, it raised one hand and knocked 3 times against the wall. I woke immediately. The clock read 3:14 a.m. The room was freezing. Tap, tap, tap. The knocks came from the wall beside me. I stared at the plaster. I do not know why I responded. Perhaps I was angry. Perhaps I was tired of being afraid. Perhaps something on the other side had been influencing me from the beginning, slowly weakening my judgment until I gave it what it wanted. A powerful need grew inside me. I had to know whether it understood me. I climbed out of bed and approached the wall. The plaster felt painfully cold beneath my fingertips. I pressed my ear against it. At first I heard only silence. Then something moved. It sounded like a hand sliding slowly across the other side of the wall. My heart began to race. I should have stepped away. Instead, I raised my fist. I knocked 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. The moment I finished, the entire house became silent. Not normal silence. The absence of sound had weight. The television stopped humming. The heating system went quiet. The wind outside disappeared. Even the faint electric buzz from my phone seemed to vanish. The silence pressed against my ears. It felt like the room had been sealed inside glass. I waited. 1 second, 2, 3. Nothing happened. I began feeling foolish. I had expected an answer, but perhaps I had only been frightening myself. Maybe the knocks really were pipes or animals. Maybe exhaustion had made everything seem worse. 5 seconds passed, then 10. I started to move away from the wall. A sound came from the storage room. It was not another knock. A metal lock clicked. I froze. The dead bolt on the storage room door had been on the outside when I moved in, but that night I heard something being unlocked from within. Then came the slow creak of an old hinge. The noise stretched through the hallway like a scream. The storage room door was opening. I stood beside the wall, unable to breathe. The door had been sealed for 2 years. No one could have been inside. Yet I heard the heavy wooden door move across the floor. It opened farther, then it stopped. A moment later, footsteps entered the hallway. They were slow and uneven. Drag, step, drag, step. The sound did not resemble normal walking. It was as though someone were pulling a heavy bag of wet dirt across the wooden floor. The footsteps approached my bedroom. I could hear something scraping behind them, perhaps a foot, perhaps a hand, perhaps part of a body that had forgotten how to move. The steps stopped on the other side of the wall, exactly where I had knocked. I pressed my back against the plaster. The temperature fell again. Sweat on my skin became cold. A heavy breath moved through the wall. The smell entered the bedroom. Wet earth, stagnant water, rust. There was something else beneath it. Rotting fabric and old blood. The breathing moved closer, though there was no open space between us. Then a voice whispered directly beside my ear. It sounded exactly like me. The same pitch, the same rhythm, the same slight roughness in my throat. But beneath my voice was something ancient and decayed. "Thank you for the permission, Mike." My body went numb. "I have waited 2 years for your response." The voice inhaled slowly. "Now, I can finally step out and take your place." I stumbled backward. My heel caught the edge of the rug, and I nearly fell. I reached for the light switch. It would not move. I pushed harder. The switch felt as if it had been sealed inside the wall. My bedside lamp went out. The room fell into darkness. Moonlight entered through the blinds in the thin, pale lines. Something stood in the bedroom doorway. At first, it was only a dark shape. Then it stepped forward. It had my height, my build, my messy hair. It wore the same gray shirt and dark pajama pants that I was wearing. Even its bare feet looked like mine. For one terrible moment, I thought I was looking into a mirror. Then it raised its head. Its face was almost perfect. Almost. Its eyes were too dark and set slightly too far apart. Its skin looked stretched across the bones, as though it had been shaped from wet clay and allowed to dry incorrectly. A wide smile spread across its face. The corners of its mouth continued moving until the grin nearly reached its ears. It opened its lips. There were no normal teeth. Its gums looked like rotting tree bark, dark and cracked. Thin pieces of something white pushed through them at strange angles. The creature walked toward me. Its movements were jerky and uncoordinated. It bent its knees too late with each step, as if it had only recently learned how human legs worked. "Mike," it said. The first attempt at my voice sounded distorted. It cleared its throat. When it spoke again, the imitation was perfect. "Mike." Hearing my own voice come from its mouth was worse than any growl or scream could have been. I backed into the corner. "What are you?" I whispered. The thing tilted its head. Its neck made a soft cracking sound. "I was the one who answered before you." "What?" "The tenant." I remembered what Mr. Grady had told me. The previous tenant had vanished. The creature continued approaching. He heard the knocking. He answered. Then he waited behind the wall. The grin widened. "Until you came." I understood. The thing standing in front of me was not the previous tenant. It was whatever had taken his place. The real tenant had been trapped inside the storage room for 2 years, knocking every night and waiting for someone to respond. Or perhaps the creature itself had been knocking. Maybe there had never been a difference between the prisoner and the thing wearing his body. I wanted to ask more, but my mouth would not move. The creature stopped only a few feet away. "Now," it whispered, "it is your turn to keep watch behind the wall." I tried to scream. No sound came out. My muscles became heavy. My arms hung uselessly at my sides. The thing reached toward me. Its fingers were much longer than mine. Each joint bent in several places, and the nails were dark and sharp. Its hand closed around my shoulder. The grip was as cold and hard as iron. Pain spread through my chest. I tried to pull away, but my feet dragged across the floor. The creature turned and led me into the hallway. The storage room door stood open. Darkness filled the space beyond it. There were no boxes, no furniture, no tools belonging to the landlord. The room looked deeper than the house should have allowed. The darkness continued far beyond the outside wall, forming a narrow passage without an end. The floor was covered in dust, but marks ran through it. Finger trails, footprints, long lines where bodies had been dragged. Words had been scratched into the walls. Some were too damaged to read, others were clear. Do not answer. It needs permission. I am still here. One sentence had been written hundreds of times. Don't knock back. The creature dragged me across the threshold. The moment I entered the room, the house behind me changed. The hallway seemed to stretch away. My bedroom door became distant and small. I saw the thing wearing my face standing beneath the hallway light. Its body was already improving. Its shoulders straightened. Its movements became smoother. The false skin settled across its features until every detail looked correct. It smiled with my normal smile. You will become quieter with time, it said. I tried to hold the doorway, but my fingers passed through the wooden frame as though I had become smoke. The darkness entered my body. My hands disappeared first, then my arms. My feet sank into the floor. My physical shape dissolved into dust and shadow. I felt my thoughts spreading through the room. Memories broke apart around me. My childhood home, my parents' faces, my first day at work, the moment I signed the rental agreement, the sound of the first knock. Everything drifted away from me. The thing stepped into the hallway and reached for the door. Wait, I tried to say. No sound came. It watched me from behind my own eyes. Then it closed the door. The last thing I heard was the metal deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. Click. I do not know how long I have been in the darkness. Time is different here. Perhaps only a few hours have passed. Perhaps years have gone by. I cannot feel my hands or feet. I do not think I have a body anymore. I am only a mind trapped inside the dust, the walls, and the shadows. I can hear what happens in the house. The creature is living my life. It answered my phone when my boss called. It spoke with my voice and apologized for being late. It contacted Mr. Grady and told him everything was fine. I heard the landlord come to the house. He stood outside the storage room and spoke quietly to the thing wearing my body. So it happened again? He asked. Yes, the creature replied in my voice. Mr. Grady sighed. You need to stay longer this time. People ask questions when tenants disappear too quickly. I understand. The landlord knew. Perhaps he had always known. Maybe the cheap rent was never an act of kindness. The house needs new people. The thing needs new bodies. Mr. Grady simply brings them here. Since then, I have listened as the creature learns to become me. At first, it walked awkwardly. It spent hours practicing expressions in the mirror. It repeated my recorded phone calls until it could copy every pause and nervous laugh. Now, no one can tell the difference. My friends have visited. They sat in the living room with the creature and spoke about things we had done together. It remembered everything. Perhaps it took my memories when it touched me. It laughed when they laughed. It complained about work. It even made plans for the weekend. No one noticed that the person sitting beside them was not human. At night, it enters my bedroom and sleeps in my bed. At exactly 3:14 a.m., it opens its eyes. Then it turns toward the wall. It waits. I think it can hear me. I have tried screaming. I have tried begging. Nothing passes through the wall. Only 3 small knocks can escape. I do not understand why. Perhaps the room allows only one message. Perhaps the knocking is part of the trap. I fight the need every night, but the pressure grows until it becomes unbearable. Something inside the darkness forces me toward the wall. Then I knock. Tap, tap, tap. The creature never responds. It knows better. It has already escaped. Now, it is waiting for someone new to move into the house. When that happens, I will knock every night at 3:14 a.m. Maybe the new tenant will ignore me. I hope they do. I hope they hear the sound and move away. But I also feel something else growing inside me, a terrible hunger for an answer. The longer I remain here, the harder it becomes to remember why I should protect the next person. I understand the previous tenant now. Perhaps he knocked to warn me. Perhaps, after 2 years in the darkness, he simply wanted someone to take his place. I am beginning to forget which feeling is mine. I am still in the storage room. I am trapped inside the walls, waiting for someone on the other side to respond. The thing with my face is out there somewhere. It may have already left the house. It may be walking through town, talking to my friends, and making plans with people who believe I am still alive. One day, it will disappear. Mr. Grady will find another tenant. The house will become cheap and available again. Someone will move into my bedroom. They will notice the sealed storage room. They will ask about the missing key. The landlord will avoid their eyes and tell them not to worry. For the first few weeks, the house will remain quiet. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., I will wake them. Tap, tap, tap. I want to believe I will be warning them. I want to believe some part of me will still care. But the darkness is changing me. Sometimes I practice their possible voices. Sometimes I imagine what it would feel like to walk again, to breathe, to wear warm skin, to look into a mirror and see a face. So, if you are reading this late at night and hear 3 knocks coming from inside your wall, do not answer. Do not touch the plaster. Do not press your ear against it. Leave the room. Leave the house if you can. Whatever you hear, remain silent. Even if the voice behind the wall sounds frightened. Even if it knows your name. Even if it tells you that it is trapped and needs help, especially then. Please, for the love of God, do not knock back. Your silence is the only thing keeping you safe.